Welcome to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth, and we're here to preserve and promote culture in this benighted age, one weekly conversation at a time. You can find and subscribe to this podcast via Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, and a whole bunch of other venues. Just visit our site, vmspod.com, to find more information, as well as our RSS feed, which you can plug into any podcatcher so you never miss an episode of the Virtual Memories Show. You can also follow me on Blue Sky, Instagram, and YouTube, where I go by vmspod, and subscribe to my semi-weekly newsletter at buttondown.com/vmspod. Well, I am kind of extricating myself from the winter doldrums, or seasonal affective disorder, or soul-crushing depression, whatever you want to call it. Today's a pretty good day so far, despite the cold, lack of sun, impending ice and snow, and oh, sheesh, maybe it's not so good a day if I put it that way. But anyway, I'm moving forward. I am, as is my wont, trying not to let a day go by without making some sort of contribution to the world, you know? I haven't gotten much of the writing done that I was hoping to do to kick off the year. I had this stretch of a whole lot of episodes backed up. This is going to be the first new one that I've recorded since the winter solstice. But yeah, I didn't get as much done as I had hoped to. But you know, I got more done than a lot of other people. So, hey, and I got a podcast for you and the newsletters and all that stuff. So that's something. But let's get to this week's show. As I said, this is a new one. My guest is Jonathan Ames, who is a past guest and a friend of the show. And Jonathan has a fantastic new novel out now from Mulholland Books. It's called Karma Doll, and it is the third in his series about a private detective named Happy Doll. The Doll books, the first one was A Man Named Doll. The second one was The Wheel of Doll, and now Karma Doll. They are absolute page turners by a writer who clearly adores crime fiction. If you're familiar with Jonathan's fiction or his essays or his great TV shows like Bored to Death and Blunt Talk, you are going to totally groove with his take on the L.A. private detective. And as befits Jonathan Ames' lead character, Happy carries a lot of emotional baggage. He's also too smart for his own good and deeply loves the dog in his life, George. All of these things fit with Jonathan, too. It gets beyond that when you face the violence and cycle of vengeance in Happy's line of work. And all of that gets Happy Doll to start exploring and studying Buddhism in hopes of finding a better way to live. And the books are a blast. There's plenty of action, detective work, humor, an incredible sense of place centered on the sprawl of Los Angeles. But you get Happy's struggles with his own past and his sense of justice and the nature of violence that make for really great, tense reading. Even as you're going to laugh your ass off over some of his conversations and observations and situations he ends up in. Now, I love the Doll books. In a perfect world, we'd have one of these every year. I said this my wife and I said this after seeing The Nice Guys, a movie with Russell Crowe and Ryan Gosling, that perfect world, the two of them would just put out those two characters year upon year upon year. But I will take what I can get, and I am so glad to have Karma Doll. Now, as I mentioned, the character is trying to find something in his life. In this case, Happy's narration gets into some Buddhist tenets, and we see how Jonathan weaves that into the world, not just the explication of these tenets, but what it's like to try to live up to the Four Noble Truths while being a private detective in Los Angeles and dealing with some heavy retribution coming your way. Happy has choices to make, and we see how our choices can lead us into hell. and how much work it takes to try to get off of that karmic wheel, or what it means to embrace it, I guess. Which I know sounds kind of vague. I'm talking in generalities about this thing. I just don't want to give away a lot of the plot. And there are plot elements of the first two books that carry into this one also, and they really are fantastic novels. You need to give those a read. But still, I don't want to get too in the weeds with it. All of that said, I think I said at the top, this is an absolute page-turner of a novel. Karma Doll, you will find yourself compelled to keep going. Happy's journey through we'll say the underworld of LA, as well as his experiences in Mexico, it will have you riveted and, like I said, laughing your ass off. As we get at late in the conversation, you will probably also come away from these books thinking they would make a great TV series. So if you happen to have any pull in that world, consider this a nudge to check out the Happy Doll books and see about bringing Jonathan's stories to a bigger audience, because I think he's doing something special here. He's writing really good crime fiction and infusing that with a real unique sensibility. It's, anyway, go get Karma Doll, go get A Man Named Doll, and The Wheel of Doll, all from Mulholland Books by Jonathan Ames. You'll enjoy the living heck out of them, and that means a lot when it comes to fiction nowadays. Now, as caveats go, nothing significant as far as the recording goes, but I should just say that Jonathan and I discovered before our first podcast in 2017, we grew up like 5 miles away from each other. He's like 6 or 7 years older than me, but we come from the same little patch of northern New Jersey, which is weird. Also, we have stayed in touch since then, and I'll just say he brought some of his Buddhist study to bear on a big issue in my life late last fall. Not intruding. I just happened to open up to him about some stuff, and he came back with something meaningful, and in the process kind of helped me change my life in important ways. So maybe Happy is going to find some guidance for dealing with his problems too. Now here's Jonathan's bio. Jonathan Ames is the author of several books, including Wake Up, Sir, and most recently, The Wheel of Doll and A Man Named Doll. His novels The Extra Man and You Were Never Really Here have been adapted into films, and he's the creator of 2 television series, Blunt Talk and Bored to Death. His new book is Karma Doll. And now, the 2025 Virtual Memories Conversation with Jonathan Ames. It's been a couple of years since we last recorded. Only been about 6 or 7 months since we last sat down and gabbed, but that was off mic. Tell me about Karma Doll and what it's like revisiting Happy Doll and his life, and in the midst of that, the COVID gap that's built into this novel.
Yeah, well, I don't know that it's so much a revisiting, because I've been basically writing the 3 doll books continuously since summer of 2019. Mm-hmm. So it's just one book has led into the next. And in fact, I think I started the second one and the third one. Well, actually, no, I started the second one while I was like awaiting editing on the first one. And then, and I must have been editing Karma Doll up until September, and then I started the fourth one. So they're one sort of long, continuous work. So I in the midst of writing the doll books, I've been also hustling, writing various screenplays, my few Hollywood jobs, writing a script on spec. But so I've just been with Happy Doll the whole time for 5.5 years. And want to get going on a fourth book. I mean, like I said, I started a fourth book, but there's been too many interruptions. And actually the fourth book was the third book, for those who might eventually read it, rain and atmospheric rivers is a big thematic thrust of the third book. And so the fourth book, and it still might be the case, was going to be about fires, and as the backdrop for the latest case. And in all the books, Happy is very aware of the environment, always talking about the external world. And I think the first novel begins shortly after there had been fires, and that the hills were just beginning to heal, the hills in Malibu anyway. And so, but now after the catastrophic fires of just a few weeks ago, it's like, okay, do I set it during those fires? Do I set it 6 months later? Do I still keep fire at the center? So the fourth book, which I'm working on, is sort of muddled at the moment. Anyway, there's a long-winded way to saying that there's been no revisiting. It's just been staying...
living with, yeah.
Living with, yeah.
As long as it doesn't come out in the fourth book that Happy accidentally starts the fires this time around, I'll be good. But
I had thought for several years, even before the fire book, which I began, which was also going to echo a Ross MacDonald, Lou Archer book that featured fires. I thought of Happy stumbling upon a group of arsonists or something, because it's even before these terrible fires, we've been living with this threat. Obviously, it's a part of LA life. It's just the level of this catastrophe, but other fires had also been catastrophic, and in other parts of the state. And then, of course, that recent terrible fire in Hawaii. I mean, this is part of our crazy modern world.
We had them here in northern New Jersey, one town over from where you and I grew up and live, over in Pompton Lakes. There was this big one and one over in Greenwood Lake at the same time. And it was just this realization to us, it was this happened somewhere else. You know, we're not supposed to have this sort of stuff. And Greenwood Lake having evacuation orders was, again, just a different world that we've all brought upon ourselves, fallen into, inherited. I don't know.
Complicit with.
Yeah. But for the new book, for Karma Doll, Happy, you have this wonderful mechanism basically to kind of get us past the lockdown phase of COVID, where Happy ends up spending those years in relative isolation in a place in Mexico and just reading up on Buddhism. How much is that echo either your life or your fantasy of what those early days of COVID, were like or could have been like in terms of extracting, finding a way to escape from, the communal situation we were in?
Yeah. Well, it was interesting creatively. Like, okay, I didn't necessarily want to write about COVID and masks and vaccines. And I had once spent, and I think it was in end of 2013, early 2014, like 6 amazing weeks in Baja, in a very isolated part of Baja Sur, I believe it's called, and the area that I describe in the book. And it was very off the grid. There was no infrastructure, any kind of house or small domicile, had a water tank and a generator or solar panels. Like there was no electricity, there were no telephones, there was really no internet. I think there was one antenna somewhere that maybe you could get some internet. So it was a really interesting lifestyle, which I loved. And it was all dirt roads and the ocean and swimming and fishing. So I think I've always had a fantasy of going back there or just disappearing to there. And so it was, and I wanted to write about that terrain. So that's where I sent my character, my protagonist, for the COVID years. And yes, I had begun in the second book, The Wheel of Doll, that Happy, as a way to deal with his violent life and the consequences of his violent life, had begun to study Buddhism, seeking some answers, some solace, perhaps a philosophy on how to live and live with less suffering. And so that entered in the book during his Mexico sojourn. And so I don't know if it was so much how I wanted to live during COVID, but maybe it was a fantasy of living off the grid in general. Yeah. And because it wasn't how I lived during COVID. I think during COVID I was writing the second doll book, and the books kind of lagged behind real time. So I mean, the first book, which I wrote in 2019, takes place in 2019. Then the Wheel of Doll picks up like a year later and is 2021. And yeah, I think it takes place in like January of 2020,
just before.
20, yeah. Right before COVID. Yeah. And there's some intimation of it because someone's sick, but I was writing that during like 2020 to 22. Well, actually it came out in 20. Anyway, who cares about all this chronology, but they kind of follow the time. And so then when I began the third doll book, it's like, I wanted to pick up where the second one ended, because the second one ended almost in a cliffhanger in a sense. I mean, the story was over, but Happy was very injured and holding a dying woman who dies. Anyway, I don't want to give too much away from the second book, but anyway, all this to say that I'm sort of behind the time as I'm writing it, which I want the backdrop of the real world, which is also another challenge we're going through right now. It's like, what is our real world? Like, if I'm writing now in January of 25, but I'm set the book in November of 25, there might be more cataclysmic things going on. And so like the books aren't overly topical or of the moment, but they're
contemporary.
The backdrop of reality is there. So anyway, it's just interesting, the lag time of one writing. I remember some Philip Roth quote and this was in the age of newspapers, where he said something like, "I can't compete with the newspapers every day." Like and imagine
that was too much. Yeah.
And, now it's like you can't compete with 8,000 microsecond posts a moment flooding into our minds.
Yeah, fire hose,
so
man.
There we are.
That's why I disconnected, sat down with a book. It's why I like getting the hard copies of books for the guests, and not PDFs or anything, just with let me not have a device in my hand. Yeah. Let me just sit with a book, and even when I have to stop and take notes, I'm like, let me just scribble this down on a piece of paper, not open up the note-taking app and then, while I've got the computer on, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, I don't know. So talk about incorporating the Buddhist, we'll say Buddhist thought or philosophy into the book. Because this one, there's a very explicit section early on where Happy kind of tries to enumerate the principles, what he's trying to live up to and what it means. And then we see how it plays out in the course of him being a protagonist in a crime novel. Talk, I guess, about some of the challenges and what it gave you in terms of, either understanding the philosophy or kind of subverting the whole genre that you're working in.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I always, when I taught writing, my maxim was write what you love. So write the kind of books you love to read, or the stories you kind of read, or, mimic the forms that have pleased you because you've been an apprentice through your reading of that form. Like, if you love reading Game of Thrones and books like that, then that's the kind of book that you should write. Or if you love reading memoir or, David Sedaris essays, then that's maybe what you should write. And in my case, it's my primary reading for a while now has been private detective novels and various Buddhist philosophical texts. So when Happy expounds on these things, and I try to be judicious, so it's not too much, in a way, it's me, it's a reflection of that. I love reading these sorts of books and trying to understand this Eastern philosophy and apply its principles. They're very basic, helpful principles to leading a life of less anxiety, less suffering, less compulsive behavior, working with one's thinking. Now, I'm far from enlightened, far from understanding everything, but I have found the tools in these books to be very helpful. And so Happy, who's not me, he's like a funhouse mirror of maybe something inside me. He's also reading these sorts of books and trying to make sense of them and how to apply principles of compassion, the middle way, let's say, of moderation and being sensible and mindful into a life where he is a private detective, where it's dealing with, the darkest impulses people have, the least Buddha-like impulses, and his own impulses. So so it's fun to play with that, not over do it. So I'm in any way lecturing the reader. I also try to make it very clear that Happy is a fledgling student, so I don't want to turn anyone off from Buddhist philosophy in case they see the way he's interpreting it. So it's kind of like my version. It might sound highfalutin, in the same way that Graham Greene was always grappling with Catholic themes for his characters, but hopefully in the case of Greene, and I didn't find, where it wasn't overwhelming the story, but was a part of the character's internal monologue for how they deal with the world. And so that's what I do with Dahl.
Is there any degree to which your understanding of those principles has been refined through the writing of these novels? Did writing about Happy's relationship to it kind of open you up to ways of seeing these things?
Well, I think as I write the book, and these Dahl books take about from start to finish, including like the editing process with an editor and, sometimes waiting for his notes for a month and then copy editor. I'd say they're like maybe 16 months. And during that time, I'm always continuing my own little personal study of the philosophy. And so my understanding is growing or becoming more confused, or it's like anything where, you hit a level and then you maybe stall and then go to another level. And so in trying to articulate some of it for Happy and simplify it, it helped me try to be like, how could I simplify the Four Noble Truths for a reader and through Happy's filter? And so it made me try to become precise with my thinking about the Four Noble Truths. And for anyone who, most people wouldn't know the Four Noble Truths, which ostensibly is the Buddha's first teaching, I can lay them out very quickly, is sure. One, acknowledge that you suffer, i.e. don't be in denial. Acknowledge that there's a certain amount of pain and confusion with life. And okay, this is normal. You suffer. Now, and there's various reasons you suffer, because of not being able to control one's thinking, not being able to control one's behavior, and human existence itself, in which we get sick, we die, everyone around us dies. There's a lot about life that is painful. So acknowledge that you suffer. Two, noble truth number two, analyze your suffering and analyze the impermanent nature of life. Come to accept that. Don't acknowledge your mortality and the mortality of those around you. And also in analyzing your suffering, see all the ways in which you make things worse through compulsive behaviors, compulsive negative thinking, being argumentative, being, giving over to anger, giving over to gluttony. See all the ways in which you contribute to your suffering and the pain you cause others. And so that's noble truth number two. Now, having done this research, noble truth number three, begin to change some of these behaviors, begin to change the way you think. And the Buddha gives various ways in which you can see the world that would help your thinking, your fearful thinking, your negative thinking, your angry thinking, your judgmental thinking. And then also working with your behavior. So in Noble Truth number 3, begin to change some of these behaviors. Let's say you have a problem with drinking too much, and so then you lessen your drinking, or you stop drinking. You're like, oh, I feel better, because you also learn that these things that we think make us feel better, whether it be raging or overeating, or all the various ways in which we try to soothe our pain, but ultimately make our pain worse, that if we're able to stop these things, we can glimpse greater peace and liberation. And then the fourth noble truth is basically, again, my interpretation is, then do more of this. Liberate yourself further and further. Having glimpsed some success, keep going. And if you keep going and you liberate yourself from cyclical patterns of pain, which the Buddhists call samsara, basically what Einstein called doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results, and always getting the same, perhaps painful result, that you might eventually become enlightened, where you have freed yourself from a lifetime of cyclical suffering. Now, that's usually beyond the grasp of us ordinary humans, but you can lessen your pain more and more. And the more you lessen your pain, the more available you can be to other people to help them, and which is a good way to live. So anyway, that was a little discourse on just my trying to understand the Four Noble Truths. And that could be wrong, but that's how I've interpreted it. And so anyway, I've lost my whole train of thought, but it's in trying to have Happy explain some of these things, I try to become more precise in my own understanding.
Yeah, that's what I was asking. Exactly. You didn't lose the thread at all. So,
okay,
although it raises the question, which I'm sure we tackled in the 2022 conversation, the challenges.
We did speak in 2022.
We talked about the second book. I'm pretty sure. I think I read the first, but we didn't get a chance to record. But anyway, the question is that integrating that into this genre of one in which there are expectations of violence, and where Happy himself is wrestling with the samsara, with the nightmare that he is participating in, and trying to figure out how to get himself out of that loop, while still making a satisfying page-turning crime novel, which is also very funny in parts. I should add also, for our listener who's listening in, this is not some dry, either Buddhist text or, just hard-boiled crime. There's an awful lot of humor in what you do in the pages. But yeah, talk about the I guess that challenge of making a character who can live up to that and make it plausible as action goes, and as crime fiction, expectations tend to run you.
Yeah, well, I think it's this thread with him, and I think as long as I don't overdo it, but come back to it once in a while, like, oh gosh, what is going to be the karmic consequence of me slugging this guy, though, or and so I think it gives he's not just an automaton, he's battling with right and wrong through this Buddhist lens. Like Marlowe had his own code, and if there's some Chandler essay where he saw Marlowe as kind of this idealized knight, trying to help the little guy, and so Marlowe had a strong code that was implicit in his behavior, the way he acted, and he would, I think sometimes reference it, that the choices he made were somewhat based on his code, and then someone like the Dashiell Hammett's the Continental Op. I mean, he's a lawman through and through, and his code is grab the bad guys. Like he was he worked for the Continental Agency, which was like Hammett's fictionalized take on the Pinkertons, for which Hammett had been a private investigator. And so Happy's moral code is, you know, he's not as sure as those guys. He's more confused, which is maybe where some of the humor comes in. And so the moral code that he's trying to apply is Buddhist inflected. Is that the right use of the word flected, or
I think
Buddhist
so.
colored
Infected.
by
Yeah.
Buddhist concepts? So it's whenever he has a choice to make, perhaps there could be a brief mention of how he's seeing things through his muddled Buddhist lens.
You have a great passage in there near the end about analysis leading into Buddhism for the character also, and the ways in which they parallel each other from those Four Noble Truths you brought up, and how they have their sort of analogs in how analysis goes. I've never been in, so I'm going to take your word for it as all that goes. But again, it never feels like it's a stop now, Jonathan is telling us all this stuff. It does flow, and Happy very much feels like his own character and his own being, which I appreciate. Having had conversations with you, this doesn't feel like it's, just Jonathan on the page, if you get me. Mm-hmm. But what's gotten, I would say, easier or tougher about writing Happy? Having a continuing character and being with them all these years. Are there well, tell me about writing a continuing character. You've done television a couple of times. You've had series, which of a nature are continuing, but this is different, I think. So.
Yeah. I mean, I remember, I think I think it might've been an interview with Dashiell Hammett or something where he said something like he missed being with his fat cop, the Continental Op, who amazingly is never named. And for Hammett fans or for the uninitiated, the Continental Op was Hammett's primary vehicle. I mean, he had the Maltese Falcon, which was one Sam Spade novel, and then there was a Sam Spade story called A Man Named Spade, which is why I titled the first doll book A Man Named Doll. Though actually I think it was A Man Called Spade, but I did A Man Named Doll because I didn't want the double L's in call and doll. And that so Hammett said something like he missed being with that guy. And then there was also with Hammett, Nick and Nora Charles. So he only did a few Thin Man books that I'm not totally pulling all the facts to the top of one of my lobes, whichever lobe is engaged here. But so anyway, I so resonated with like he missed being with his fat cop, or he liked playing the fat cop and thank you for feeling that Doll is his own person, is not just me, which even if in my own voice, which is something like I don't think I could necessarily capture me. Like when I wrote nonfiction, I still was doing a performance of some kind, a version of myself. But Happy Doll is this, if I was an actor, he's this character I'm playing when I speak through him. And so he might have some of I'm hearing my own nasality as I speak to you. So he could sound like me, but he is his own guy. I'm becoming someone else. And sometimes I think of it, and it's interesting, I named him Doll because when I was a boy growing up in northern New Jersey near you, we were probably, I'm a few years older than you, but there you were playing up in the woods in Ringwood, and I was playing in the woods in Oakland. But I would take my G.I. Joe dolls into the woods and have them climb this little hill and tumble down, or I'd play with them in my room. And I think those were some of my happiest times, playing with my G.I. Joe dolls and having them talk or think and just feeling like that they were having adventures. I was always drawn to like risk and adventures, and I loved to have my dolls tumble down this hill. And so now here I am going to be 61 years old, and I'm still playing with my doll. And I named him Doll because I thought, again, playing with the genre, these guys being so hard-boiled and tough, that my guy would have this name that seems to be the opposite of tough, Doll. And then for some reason I called him Happy Doll, though in the first book he was kind of hiding that was his birth name by going by Hank. And I think I made the analogy like a guy wearing a toupee. And then by the second book, he's more embraced that, what, this is the name my parents gave me. They didn't think it was going to be something I would be teased for. And so he's Happy Doll or Hap Doll. And, but yeah, he's his own person. And so in that sense, it's liberating because he's on his own journey. So I like spending time with him. And I think I've always been drawn to series. Like I love Ross McDonald's Lou Archer series. I did love reading all of Chandler's Philip Marlowe novel and short stories. And then as Chandler was developing Marlowe in the short stories, sometimes the detective had different names, but later those stories became Marlowe stories. And then one of the things that got me into wanting to write a series as I got more and more into genre reading was, Lee Child and Jack Reacher. And then some of the more classic forebears, like I'm mentioning, the Continental Op, sure. Lou Archer from McDonald. And then, actually after I had started Doll, I began reading Robert Cray, who's got this great detective team, Elvis Cole and Joe Pike, who are LA detectives. And then I loved Michael Connelly and his Bosch series. So there's something fun about hitting a voice that you can return to. And one thing, I was actually talking to a friend of mine, a great novelist, Susan Minot, and I highly recommend people read her most recent book, Don't Be a Stranger, is that every book she writes, every novel she writes, which is kind of fitting for the word novel, new, she reinvents the wheel on how to tell the story, third person, first person, how much time the story takes, the paragraphs, are they short paragraphs with spaces in between? As she reinvents the wheel every time. And one of the things about writing with genre is like, it does give me a form like a ceramicist that a ceramicist, you want to make a coffee mug that someone can drink out of. Yeah. And so with the genre book, there's a certain shape. And for me, the Doll books have a certain shape. They usually take place over a few days to give this sense of urgency. Now, with this Doll book, takes place over 3 years, but really the whole last 2/3 of the book, I think, is like 3 or 4 days of urgency.
There's a moment where a guy mentions meeting someone, a Doll mentions seeing someone earlier that day, and I was like, oh my God, yeah, that was earlier that day.
Yeah, and because when you read the Ross McDonald books, the guy just goes, he's driving all over. And then of course, one of my favorite series of all time is the Parker series by Richard Stark. Yeah. He wrote 24 of those books. So there's a real comfort in the shape of the genre, giving me the shape of the story. How to tell the story. And then I get to play within those confines, and I'm not reinventing the wheel every time with every book.
Are you tempted at all? Not tempted. Do you think of those, we'll say, literary forms for sake of ghettoizing various types of literature? That's certainly where you came up from initially in your career. Does that interest you at all at this point? Are there ideas that you think, this wouldn't really be a happy thing? I should spend 5 years coming up with a 500-page novel of blah, blah, blah. Or is that impulse largely gone? Do the ideas kind of subsume themselves into this and maybe some of the TV writing?
Yeah, I think, what did you call it? Literary Forbes?
Literary fiction.
Oh, literary fiction. Okay. I misheard something. Yeah. I mean, even though I'm saying, okay, the genre gives me a form, I'm not totally thinking like, okay, I'm a crime novelist now, like, because I'm still very much care about the sentence. But what happened to me as a reader was that I came to be addicted to the experience of a page turner, which you don't necessarily feel when you read literary fiction.
Yeah.
Like you might be engrossed, but there's not necessarily always this compulsion to turn the page. Like recently, I had to reread some books for a review that I hope will come out, and where it was actually for the Wall Street Journal, which I did feel some hesitancy about because whatever.
At least they're honest about who they are. That's how I put it at this point. But anyway, sorry, well, that's a sidetrack. So,
but it's still again, to be political, unfortunately, and show one's bias. It's still a Rupert Murdoch owned publication, and I feel Murdoch has done so much to destroy the planet.
Yeah.
And so anyway, oh gosh. Anyway, I wrote.
Okay, no one's listening. It's all right.
I wrote a piece for them, but I had to reread some books from the past that I had selected, and one of them was like Inside Mr. Enderby by Anthony Burgess, which is a very funny comedic novel and has a good pace to it, but it's not like the pacing of a Michael Connelly. But then again, the prose is so amazing in Enderby. So I think I try in my own way to still very much care about the prose in the Dahl books, to give them what some of like the heft that you might get from literary fiction. So I haven't abandoned literary fiction. I'm just not necessarily thinking in those terms one way or the other. And I wasn't thinking in those terms when I wrote my earlier novels. I was just trying to write, again, the kind of books I love to read. So like my first novel, I Pass Like Night, was a very dark first novel, but very inspired by Hubert Selby's Last Exit to Brooklyn, but also Hemingway's In Our Time, because it was, short chapters. Hemingway's In Our Time was probably considered a collection of stories, but mine was like these short chapters to create like a mosaic of a novel, and also Raymond Carver at the time. And then my second book, The Extra Man, was an homage to Don Quixote and the works of Somerset Maugham and Evelyn Waugh and Fitzgerald and A Confederacy of Dunces and Enderby, where I wanted to write like a grand comedic novel about a young gentleman, what I called like a young gentleman, someone who had a. And then my third book was an homage to P.G. Wodehouse, called Wake Up, Sir. And so I've always mimicked the kind of literature I've enjoyed reading. But then for years I was just writing essays, and then I got caught up in the world of TV and basically stopped writing prose for about 10 or 12 years and was just writing scripts. And then I went back to prose. Anyway, I'm giving my whole resume here, but you were never really here because I'd been reading all this Richard Stark. And so anyway, again, a long-winded answer of saying I'm not necessarily thinking about genre or literary fiction. It's just sort of writing the sorts of things that I love to read through my own sensibility. But in the case of the Dahl books, trying to do some of the things that create for the reader this sense of wanting to turn the page in a very urgent way, which is what I love in the more pulpy genre fiction that I've read and have been mostly consuming for the last, all my life I'd been reading Chandler and Hammett, but then starting in the late 2000s, I began just only reading page turners like Richard Stark, but I also consider something like Game of Thrones a page turner. And recently I read all these wonderful novels by Bernard Cornwell, his Last Kingdom series that became a TV show. There was like 12 of them. And then his King Arthur series. They were kind of like historical fiction page turners.
Yeah.
Anyway, on we go.
I don't know. It's to me, it's that melding of all this stuff. Exactly what you said. Write what you love makes the most sense. It's the things that interest you and the things that bring you joy. Without it, you make it work and make it really entertaining for the reader. You make the page turner, as you were trying to aspire to, I would say. So along those lines, I that gets at that question that I was wondering about, what's gotten easier about doing this. Do you feel you get Happy better? You get the character of Happy and his voice better than when you'd started out? Do you feel more comfortable, in his skin, I guess, as you're narrating these novels?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. It's not something I'm so aware of, but I think when I wrote the first one, I'm like, I think this is working. I think I'm onto something here.
Yeah.
And then people really responded strongly to him, like, okay, wow, I did achieve that. I wrote a page turner. I had done it once before with You Were Never Really Here, but that was a much shorter book, third person. And so then the second one was like, okay, here I go again. And then I remember I really struggled for a while with the second book. And then I changed several things all around. I think I had written like 90 pages, and I think I threw out almost the whole thing and just began again. And so writing is never really easy. But I think without becoming aware of it, I can slip into Dahl's voice more easily. And then now, let's say I'm on the fourth one, I've become aware of the conventions I've used that help to create the page turning effect, which is akin to liking a sort of music. If I was a musician, like I like, if I was a jazz person, I'm like, oh, I'm trying to do my version of Miles Davis. And so I think, I've become more practiced at it, like someone playing tennis. It's like, oh, my game is pretty good now. I get my first serve in most of the time. My backhand's consistent. At the same time, there's always challenges, and then you have to be careful not to become, what's the word? Just going through the motions or doing your own shtick. That was something I had discovered had happened to me in the writing of essays, that I was like mimicking my own self. I was just doing shtick, and it had lost something authentic. So that can be a concern. And I mean, that's one of the things that I so admire about Ross MacDonald and Lou Archer. Like those Archer books, all 18 of them, he may have been repeating tropes, but it all still felt very vital and vibrant. And same thing with Richard Stark and his 24 Parker novels. Like those guys were playing their trumpet with gusto and not just doing shtick. They were. So anyway, I hope I can maintain a vitality and not just become, like doing shtick and have it just feel repetitive or redundant.
I should ask, and I don't think I did the previous time we talked. Again, you've written for TV and film. Is there a Happy goes to translates into TV vibe for you, or do you really feel like this is a character on a page? I should just ask: are you looking to, do you have any thoughts about this actually becoming a series, a television or feature thing at some point? I know there's a dream of that sort of stuff, but sorry, go on.
Yeah, no, there's a dream because it's also a financial dream.
Yeah,
because it's nearly impossible to survive just writing books. And I don't get advances that one could live on.
Yeah.
And which is fine. So the hope is to then make the money through optioning or it becoming a series. And the first Dahl book did get optioned, which was very helpful. But then the option, it didn't get made. And so then sometimes this can become a hindrance if money has been paid towards something. Now it's like against it, and so. But I mean, I'm happy for Dahl just to be on the page. That's what he was written for. But if it became a series or film, whether I was the engine behind it, that would be great, because then I can continue to pay the rent. But I don't know if that will happen. But something like Slow Horses, I started watching that show, and then of course I see, based on the novels by blah blah blah, and so then I read the books, and they were so great, and I've read all 8 of them, and I think there's been 4 seasons, which represent, like, I think the first 4 books. The seasons, the TV show is actually quite faithful to the novels, with some derivations and compression here and there, and so, but in the case of Mick Herron and the Slow Horses novels, he was on the verge of losing his publisher, or maybe did lose his publisher, and it might have been increasingly hard for him to publish those books. But then, thankfully, some intelligent person started turning, optioned it all. And I don't know how close his involvement with the series is. I don't think I see his name listed as a producer, but it's been a great boon for him, I'm sure, and then also for the books, because then in my case it led me to the books. Same thing with Game of Thrones, and so many TV shows, of course, are based on the books. Like I want to get the books that the Silo TV series was based on. And I remember after watching the first season of Game of Thrones, I got the Game of Thrones books, and they were so great. Even as great as the series was, I found the books to be even more spectacular, and it was so frustrating that he never finished the story, that he allowed the TV series to complete it. But anyway,
one of my pod descendants, Scott Edelman, is a friend of George R. R. Martin. They're both writers in the field, and Scott does a podcast inspired by this one, but it's always centered around eating with his guests. But he had Martin on, and the joke was the two of them were never going to mention Game of Thrones in the entire interview. Mm-hmm. And he does the whole shebang without ever mentioning, this guy's got some promise. He might have some good projects going, and just never actually mention game. But, that's there's only so much you can do around that space when you're kind of hoping to nudge an author towards something, I guess. But thanks for mentioning Silo, which I have not watched. Heard is good. And when the first season came out, like a publicist pitched me on the author, and I had no idea what they were talking about. So, that's a reminder. I need to go back and check that out and see if I can connect with the writer for that. So.
Yeah, I mean, Apple TV, somewhat depressingly, I'm drawn to the stuff anyway, but they have really cornered the market on dystopia. I mean, they do the best dystopia out there. I mean, HBO, I guess, with based on that video game, I forget the title of the show.
The Last of Us.
Oh, The Last of Us. So that's their dystopic thing, and then they had some other dystopic shows. There was one with I can't remember all the titles. There was the Ridley Scott one set on a strange foreign planet with that wonderful actor who was the lead of the TV show Vikings, who's now in HBO's Dune. But anyway, Apple has really cornered the market on dystopia, because Silo is amazing. The TV show C they had was amazing. Invasion was quite amazing. But they're very good at high production depression. But Silo is very gripping and is done by the wonderful television writer whose name I'm blanking on, but he also was behind the TV show Justified and is also involved with
the guy with the greatest track record. He did The Americans, Slow Horses, Justified, and I didn't realize he was also a Silo guy. I'm blanking out. I'm looking him up on IMDb right now.
What's his name? I can't believe
Graham
I'm
Yost.
blanking.
Graham
What?
Yost.
Oh, yeah, that
Yeah.
guy. He is awesome.
Yeah, because when we saw him in Slow Horses, I'm like, I'm pretty sure I know that name. Looked him up on IMDb. I'm like, he has 3 home runs. I'll go with
I
Justified and The
know.
Americans also. So,
Oh, my gosh. And, to have home runs, like really good home runs in Hollywood and TV, I mean, you've got to have, like, you just have to be like a really strong racehorse
yeah.
because, you're just dealing with so many people, so much collaboration, so many hoops to jump through. So it's like not only having talent as a writer, but like interpersonal skills talent and then conviction of your ideas and then stamina. I mean, these TV shows are, there's so much work, like the Vikings TV show, which had 8 or 9 seasons. And there was some brilliant writer behind that who was the creator. I mean, every episode had like hundreds of extras, and they're filming in Iceland, and you're having to crank out scripts and approve costumes and the editing. And of course, you have people helping you, but
it's a
you're the
lot. Somebody has to,
when,
the buck has to stop with somebody.
And so when you're the showrunner, the buck stops with you. And I've done it. I can't believe I've done it. I don't know who that person was that I managed to do it. And these were only half-hour comedies. But like someone like Yost is like, these are 45-minute episodes, hour-long episodes, epic storytelling, huge, CGI. And I mean, anyway,
it's work.
My hat goes off my bald head to Graham Yost, wherever he may be.
I'm just hoping to see whatever he comes up with next. Although now, again, I didn't know he was the Silo guy also, so I'm going to have to jump into that
he's
series.
He's the main engine of Silo, whereas with Slow Horses, he must be like, I don't know, some kind of executive producer who just helps make sure it's good. But I think he's so again, I don't,
Talk about karma. There's karma doll, and then there's how karma plays out in the course of the book and your own experience with karma. Can you open up, elaborate?
Yeah. Well, I think, I mean, again, I'm not an expert on any of this, but in some simple way, it's becoming aware that everything we do creates a ripple. So even what I'm saying here now, hopefully I'm saying it with good intention or interesting intention, or for your listener or for you, and so I hope that I won't create any negative karma because I'm behaving basically in a benign fashion. And so you can also generate good karma. Like if someone hears this and it's like, okay, even if I'm droning on a bit, but if they're like podcasts, like, okay, this is distracting for them, and maybe it leads them to read a book they hadn't read before, and they learn something and it helps their lives. So that would create good karma. It's just becoming aware that everything we do, there is a consequence. So if you, say something mean to someone, that's going to hurt them, probably hurt you if you have a conscience, and who knows the ripple effect. Sometimes the karma could be very brief. In that moment, they yell back at you, and it's ugly, and then you move on. Sometimes you can make a more disastrous choice and really create horrific karma. Let's say you drive drunk, and then you kill someone or hurt someone. That is like just absolutely terrible karma, but it began with your choice, not you, Gil, of course, to get into the car drunk. And then there's also the karma of even our thinking. So working with our negative thinking or our resentful thinking. So I guess my understanding is just becoming very aware of that there are consequences. And when I was younger, I was more confused, or I'm still very confused, but I was perhaps more reckless. Or I had read once some mention that in some Buddhist writers said that you should go through life like walking through a forest in the dark, gently parting the branches so as not to poke yourself in the eye, and all with the idea of not creating suffering for yourself or for others. And so that's why there's certain tools or in Buddhism, qualities that are emphasized: generosity, mindfulness, kindness, concentration, focus, meditation, all to become more mindful that, that there are ripple effects. It's like physics. And for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. So I didn't necessarily, I think on some level growing up, or if you have some moral center, perhaps you grasp some of this, but to just realize how every choice, now you don't want to get paralyzed and not leave your house, but that every moment creates a ripple. And that's why in Buddhist philosophy, they emphasize unity of body, speech, and mind, like what we do with our body. If we abuse drugs, our body is going to suffer, and probably will cause suffering for those who care about us and love us. So that's your karma. What you do with your mind, how you think, if you're always attacking yourself, the Buddha said, what you think, you become. So if you're always attacking yourself and putting yourself down, you're going to be down. You're going to become that thing which you fear. Or if you're constantly, your mind is full of resentment, then you are going to become a victim. So you have to work with your mind through the karmic repercussions of our thinking. And then speech. If you speak unkindly, or let's say you try to give too much advice, or you say something harsh, or manipulative, or gossip, there's usually negative karma associated with these things. So it's very much about being mindful and kindly and taking responsibility for your actions. And we all struggle with that as we find our way. And the thing is, we're designed to make mistakes. That's how we learn. The Buddha supposedly said, I teach only suffering and the transformation of suffering. So it's kind of learning from our mistakes. Like, oh, I spoke unkindly to someone and I hurt their feelings. Oh, maybe I'll learn not to speak unkindly. So anyway, that's, again, my little fledgling student discourse on karma.
I'm hip. I've been on this, we'll just say Buddhist kick for maybe a couple of months now. I started reading The Snow Leopard by Peter Matheson last December, because I'm recording with his biographer this fall, and said, I've never read Matheson. He's like, start with The Snow Leopard, see where you go from there. Mm-hmm. And there's this degree to which, over the course of this trek through Tibet, nonfiction book, this trek through Tibet, and pursuing a lamasery and dealing with the death of his wife and some of the choices he's made in his own life, he starts to get this clarity and this better feeling and better approach to the world, sort of the higher up he gets. And it all starts to ebb near the end, and he hates himself at various points, and attributes some of this to like altitude loss. That was just the thin air was giving him simpler thoughts. And there's a degree to which, while he idolizes and emulates these a couple of monks who he sees on the way, he maybe thinks they live like that 100% of the time, and I'm not sure that's the case. Like, he's beating himself up for not being this figure, all the time, and only having these moments of we'll say enlightenment. But yeah, I think he might be attributing more enlightenment to others than they necessarily experience themselves. That there's a sense that we're all, on that wheel going up and down at various times. This is just me and my sideways ranting, but I kind of figure you're, of all guests of mine, you're one who would actually pick up on some of my readings and or thoughts on this stuff. But
yeah, I mean, I think you know, unless someone is enlightened. I mean, if you read the Dalai Lama or Thich Nhat Hanh or Pema Chodron, these are some of the people I read who are very popular in, I think, Western culture as conveyors of Buddhist thought. They will acknowledge their own struggles, but that's part of what makes them great teachers and how they
Right.
try to apply the principles. I mean, Pema Chodron very much so is always acknowledging her struggles and how she tries to apply the principles, and it's heartening in that sense. And one thing I want to say is, like, I hope I'm not coming across as like I'm no scholar on this
No,
stuff.
you've made it that this is we'll say amateur pursuit. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I don't want to mislead anyone about the notions. If they wanted to pick up books themselves, I hope they'll find their own way. And I'm certainly not saying I have any answers, but these things have helped me with my own struggles with myself, and it's been, a nice practice. What I do is I try to read a few pages every morning of this sort of texts, and it helps center me to not give over to self-centered depression or external world depression or self-pity. Um, I, I think it helps me try to see the world as glass half full, but it's not easy. None of this is easy, and yet I have it so much better than almost all human beings on the planet. I'm able to have enough food. I have shelter. I can have time to read, time to write books. I have a very, I guess I'd never use this word, but blessed existence.
Oh, I use that all the time. I prefer that over privileged. My life
Yeah,
is blessed or full of
yeah,
blessings, which I know
yeah.
carries a religious context that neither of us exactly subscribe to, but yeah.
Yeah, well, it's interesting that Judaism, which is, the religion that, and I'm a Jewish person, but I think the Jewish religion is called the blessing religion because you're supposed to say a blessing or prayer of thanks for everything. Oh, I drank a glass of water. Before I drink the water, I say thank you. I'm walking. I'm supposed to say a prayer. I mean, it's like you're supposed to be expressing gratitude all the time. And it may have become something rote where people are just mumbling prayers all the time. But I think I read some interesting Kabbalah book years ago that informed me, which I had never heard, that it was considered the blessing religion.
That sounds right. Anytime I've attended around more observant Jews than me, yeah, there's a million of these moments that,
Yes.
we stop, do the blessing, wash the hands. I'm like, okay,
Yeah,
that's what you guys
you
do.
get in a car, you're supposed to do a blessing. It's like, which is kind of cool. It's like it's a form of, or let me be mindful of the beauty of life and also the preciousness and ephemerality, that everything could change in an instant. So be grateful in this moment for this glass of water, for this stroll in the sunshine.
So the big question, which I always ask, besides reading the Buddhist texts and Burgess and such, what have you been reading?
Well, let's see. Recently, I read In a Lonely Place by Dorothy Hughes, in part for this article I was writing. And I reread The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie by Muriel Spark. I've been reading Joyce Carol Oates' most recent collection. I think it's called Flint Creek Kill, or Flint. Oh gosh, I'm botching the title. Very eerie, disturbing collection of stories, but beautiful writing. I just read Don't Be a Stranger by Susan Minot. Brilliant, beautiful, evocative novel. I'm reading Robert Cray's most recent book, The Big Empty. Let's see, I finished Michael Connolly's most recent book. I have a a Richard Lang book that I need to read, that I'm looking forward to. So I've been reading sometimes multiple books at a time. I'm reading some, I picked up some book from the Eastern section, How to Lose Yourself, the Ancient Art of Letting Go, because I was driving here in LA towards the bookstore, and I was sort of driving myself crazy with my thinking, and a friend of mine once termed such a thing menticide, where you're sort of
Yeah.
killing yourself with your own annoying thinking. And I thought, oh, I need to let go of this particular looping I'm on. And I think I was looping on my conflicted feelings about putting a book out in the world and self-promotion and everything going on the planet, and just needing to just let go. If people find the book and read it, that's wonderful. If a few people find it, that's enough. And then I went over to the Eastern section, and the title of the book was How to Lose Yourself, and ancient teachings on letting go.
Mm-hmm.
And so I picked that up. I've been reading that. So that's what I've been reading lately.
Cool.
I highly recommend In a Lonely Place by Dorothy Hughes, a really great piece of noir, beautiful writing. Muriel Spark is always a wonder. Joyce Carol Oates is a wonder. And on we go.
I do have to say, apparently part of my role doing this show, or at least through everything I've done for the last 12 or now 13 years of doing this, is to be the cheerleader for you guys, because I've had a couple of past guests / friends who have had that exact same sentiment as you. Like, what the hell am I doing? What does it matter if I put out a book into this world, this moment, this thing that we're in, this whole situation, as I call it, that it matters more than anything else. And that's, you made a book that I enjoy the living hell out of, and also learned from in the process. So I'm very thankful. But just keep doing this stuff. I know the times are awful and everything is meant to be disheartening, but making art is what you guys are on the planet for. So.
Well, and you too, Gil. I mean, you're an incredible artist in so many different ways. I mean, it's really, as you know, as I've expressed to you, but I'll say it out loud on your podcast, like, I love your newsletters. I love your artistic pursuits. I love your drawing, your Instax, the whole persona of Gil you create in the newsletter, and then your incredible appreciation of culture and bringing people on and exposing your listeners to books and art. I mean, you're an incredible force of nature with your art making and curiosity about others' art. It's really admirable, and you're of great service to the various subscribers and people that are exposed to your art making and your art appreciating. You're like a in sports, there's like a multi-tool or a what's
utility
the word?
man. Yeah.
No. Like where you have like all 5 tools.
Oh,
like
the 5-tool player. Yeah.
Yeah, like Willie Mays was like great on defense, could hit with power, ran with speed. Like you're like you're an artist multi-threat, but threat in a good way. Artist,
I appreciate it. It's we all have our disheartening moments, but just the connections I make with you guys and being able to bring these books in front of other people who are going to get joy from them. That's my whole thing, man. So, But thank you for Karma Doll. Thank you for, I hope, the 4th novel. We didn't get to talk about LA and kind of how you guys are all dealing, but we can talk about that off mic, I guess. So
okay, well, I'll just say, for anyone who's not from LA, I mean, the immediate crisis has passed. It was a really strange, nerve-wracking 10 or 12 days of studying this app. Where are the fires moving? You know, the horrific winds. I mean, this December, we had 0.3 inches of rain.
Yeah.
And the previous December, we had 25 inches. And then these winds were supercharged. I feel like 50% greater than in, you know, normal Santa Anas were 40. There was several days of 70 to 80 mile per hour winds, plus there's no rain. So it was a confluence of things. And anyway, I think the city is still in shock. And I tried to drive over to the PCH in Malibu to drive down, but it's still not open. And there was like a military checkpoint. I mean, this is a profound disaster, but there's something about LA being so big that, you know, it's miles away.
Yeah.
With 9/11, there was, I mean, if you weren't in Manhattan, in Brooklyn, you know, you didn't necessarily see this gigantic scar and crater. But anytime you went down to downtown Manhattan, you could see it. But LA is so vast that people could go years without going to Altadena or the Pacific Palisades in Malibu. It's just such a vast city that there's also like, you don't fully know what it's like over there in these utter disaster zones. I did drive through Malibu and I could see the scarring on the hills and the burnt areas, but I didn't get into the areas where there were homes that were utterly devastated. Anyway, it's been a very hard time for so many people. You know, they lost their homes, lost everything they owned. I mean, it's just been catastrophic. And in my own case, I was evacuating my parents. We were all running around like, you know, trying to stay safe.
My whole thing was looking over all of my LA area friends through that big text file I have for my postcard victims. So I'm just going through and looking at the maps and trying to figure out, okay, they're not in a zone, because I didn't want to I didn't want to bother anyone while they're in the middle of a crisis to make sure they're okay. But there was that sense of like, this could be anybody, you know, any of my pals, all my Santa Monica pals I was worried about, and they got through okay. But yeah, it's a different world that we're in at this point. So.
Yeah. And it was, for me, seeing everything also through private detective lens, along with a Buddhist lens. Like, so at one point we like hightailed it for the desert. So I was out in Palm Springs for 2 days, and I got back from Palm Springs, was like, okay, I think then my parents' area was endangered and they're quite elderly. And so then I was like, as soon as I got back from Palm Springs, like 8 o'clock at night, I had to evacuate my elderly parents and drove them up to the north to Ventura, where we luckily got a hotel right on a marina. So I was like, I came from the desert, then I went to the water. So it was kind of like Lou Archer when he races around on a case. He flies places, he drives places. So I was like, it's kind of my own little Lou Archer fantasy. Yeah.
And there's something distinctly LA about all that compared to like Greenwood Lake and Pompton Lakes having fires here. That's LA means its own thing.
Because I could go to very different environments. Like I'm out in the desert where it's kind of safe because there's nothing to burn, let's say, and it was far away from the fires. And then I went to the north and was on water but then what was crazy is a fire broke out right near my parents' hotel at one point. I'm like, no, I have them safely tucked away. Jeez. And there's like, and will the fire reach that waterfront? And will they lose power? And they're on the second floor with walkers and wheelchairs. Oh no. God. But anyway, it was anyway, on we go.
We hope we won't see another reprisal of this stuff. I'm hoping things stay safe for you guys for a while, but anyway, thank you for coming on. And, you know, I promise I will get out there and, you know, I'll sit down with you and Fezzik again at some point in the near future.
All right, Gil. Well, thank you for having me on, and you know, thank you for all your art making that I really enjoy.
Thanks, and thanks for Karma Doll, man. And that was Jonathan Ames. Go get Karma Doll. Go get the first 2 books in the series, A Man Named Doll and The Wheel of Doll, all from Mulholland Books. They are fantastic. I hope we got across some of the fun of what's in them, but they are really good page-turner detective novels. I love Jonathan's writing. Really recommend his past fiction and his essay collections, which are a hoot, as well as his 2, I will say, unforgettable TV series, Bored to Death and Blunt Talk. A lot of people know about Bored to Death. It was on HBO. Blunt Talk was on Showtime, I believe. It didn't catch on as well, but it is such an absolute delight, such a weird and entertaining show. It's only 2 seasons, but it's a blast. Anyway, go watch those. Go get Karma Doll and the other doll novels. Jonathan, as far as online presence, he's on Blue Sky as Jonathan Ames, all one word, but he really keeps a pretty low online profile. Gives him more time for writing and trying to stay sane, and really, who can blame him? Thanks for listening to the Virtual Memories Show. You can support this podcast by telling other people about it. There's no better way to build an audience than through word of mouth. Also, visit Apple's podcast page for us and leave a rating and review. Every little bit helps, you know? You can also support the show by telling me what you like and don't like about it, and who you'd like to hear me record with, or what movie or TV show or book or piece of music or comic or theater or art exhibition or whatever you think I should turn listeners on to. And you can do that by sending me a postcard, letter, email, DM if we're connected on Instagram or Blue Sky, or by leaving a message on my Google Voice number, which is 973-869-9659. Messages can be up to 3 minutes long. It'll cut you off after that, so call back and leave another message if you do. And let me know if it would be okay to include your message in an upcoming episode of the show. You might have something interesting to share with our listeners, but I'd never run someone's message without their permission, so let me know. Now, if you've got money to spare, I appreciate it, but don't give it to me. I've got a day job that pays the bills. You should give to individuals and institutions in need. You can find people through GoFundMe, Patreon, Kickstarter, Crowdfunder, Indiegogo, all those crowdfunding platforms, where you'll find people who really need help just trying to make ends meet or get an artistic project going, covering medical bills or car payments or veterinary bills, and just a few dollars from you might make a real difference in their lives. Now, when it comes to institutions, I give to my local food bank and World Central Kitchen every month, but there are a lot of other things you can give to the Poor People's Campaign, Freedom Funds, Election Funds, Planned Parenthood, and Women's Choice. There's a lot of things you can do with your money to try to help build a better world, so I hope you'll give. Now, our music for this episode is Fella by Hal Mayforth, used with permission from the artist. You can visit my archives at vmspod.com to check out my 2018 conversation with Hal, where you can learn more about his art, his music, and more. And you can follow Hal on SoundCloud at soundcloud.com/Mayforth. That's MAY4TH. And that's it for this week's episode. Thank you so much for listening. I'll be back next week with another great conversation. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show and download all our past episodes at Apple Podcasts and other podcast sources. And you can find all my episodes and sign up for the Virtual Memories Show newsletter at vmspod.com. And I'm also on Blue Sky and Instagram and YouTube as vmspod. You've been listening to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth. Keep reading, keep making art, and keep the conversation going.